Here.
Okay, so shalom, y'all, as we were saying before. And I'm Rabbi Julie Danan, and this is the Rabbi Seminar for Seaside Jewish Community 2024. And what we're doing this year is for many of the major holidays, going in depth on a topic related to the holiday. So, of course, the next big holiday is, what is it? Oh, Passover. Yeah. In a few days, it'll be Passover. And you might have anybody having guests?
Yeah.
Anyone being a guest? And the most famous guest, of course, is Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. So I thought it'd be nice to start by singing Eliyahu Hanavi. And if you don't remember the words, just the melody if you want. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimera v'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. So that gets us a little bit in the mood of learning about Elijah. And I'm going to share, I'll share my screen. Now we'll get to the awkward part where I'm trying to share my screen because we have a bracha. The awkward is the technical things, you know how that is. But here we go. I'm going to try to do my slideshow. Let's see. Okay. So there's Elijah. There's a lot of classic depiction. I'm sorry, I don't know who the artist is. I should, but I did not have time to look it up. But Elijah, the most famous guest at your Seder, looks like he is beholding the whirlwind. We'll come back to that later. And the blessing for the study of Torah. Let's join in or just say amen if you'd like. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok v'divrei Torah. Holy One, a blessing. Your presence fills creation. You've made us holy with mitzvot and bid us to engage with words of Torah. Amen. Okay. So this is I just put this for nostalgia. Like the last time I had a huge Seder with all, just about all my family, and it was 2018. So, but I wanted to ask you about your Seder and Elijah. Like I feel like almost everybody has an Elijah story from their Seder. Something happened when you open the door. Somebody always drank the wine. Somebody dressed up as Elijah. What I see, David is already chuckling. So would you like to share? And if you don't want, you can also share in the chat. Have you had any kind of Elijah experiences at your Seder? Okay, what was it? David,
well, this is when our kids were young. Our daughter was only about 2. Yeah. And we were having a Seder at our friend's house, neighbor's house. And they had older sons. One of them was a teenager. And when it came time for Elijah, the doorbell rang. And there he was, dressed up as Elijah, wearing a mask. And our daughter got so freaked out.
Oh, no.
That when Evie took it to one of I think Jeffrey or Joel,
no,
somebody, I think it was
Armin or
yeah, it was one of Jeffrey's sons, Brisses, at our synagogue in Maryland. They mentioned the chair was there for Elijah, and
Oh, no.
she freaked out. Sharon freaked out, would not go inside.
Okay, well, that's your child. I guess it's like the little kids that are scared of Santa Claus, you know, so if you don't mind the comparison. But okay. Well, how long did it take her to get over the Elijah phobia?
Yeah, just when she was little.
About 45 years.
And then we have Harvey and Elaine Freeman that someone always bumped the table leg to make the wine ripple. Creative, right? Anybody else have Elijah stories? Well, we some synagogues, well, maybe I'll do that this year because we're going to have some kids at the synagogue. I'll have somebody who's got a beard, dress as Elijah, and come in, actually, same thing, but not scary with a mask. Come in and just, surprise the kids. So, but we'll talk later on in this class about why is Elijah there? What's he doing at the Seder? So Elijah is really a fascinating figure. And how many people did get a chance to read or even get this book of Welcoming Elijah? Daniel, Matt, several people. Well, Elsa. Anybody else? Got it? Ellen, great. Definitely worth reading. As I mentioned before we started, he's a great scholar of Jewish mysticism. He translated the Zohar, which is, is a multi-volume work, from Aramaic into modern English, and he teaches a lot. And so this is in a series from Yale of great Jewish lives in here, but the life of Elijah is a little bit different from the others. It's probably has some history in it, but it's a lot of myth, legend, and folklore too. So Elijah when he talks about transformation, he's talking about how Elijah of the Bible, who was a zealot, maybe you could say a fanatic, and also though a miracle worker, and then is taken up to heaven in that fiery chariot, becomes an immortal, the Jewish immortal. He's showing up all the time over the generations in various disguises, coming to help people in need. And then for the mystics, they want to commune with him and get his wisdom. And eventually, though, we get the idea that the transformation has a new meaning, that we can transform ourselves, and that Elijah within us, maybe the uncompromising, zealous self, can transform into someone loving and caring, and we can be like Elijah's partners. I used to give with the children, give them a little card and say, would you like to join Elijah's club? And would do secret good deeds for people, So how did he go from being this zealous prophet to being that figure that comes to your Seder and maybe takes a few sips of the wine? There's just wonderful stories, and he is the most popular figure in Jewish folklore, more than King Solomon, King David, or anybody else. Elijah's mentioned the most. So let's again go back to some of the things we're going to share. Here we go. Okay, so Elijah, first let's look at his name, Eliyahu. So a lot of Hebrew names they're called theophorics, that they have a name like El, God, like Michael, Daniel, right? Ariel, something about God, or Yah, like Matityahu, right? Matityahu would have the Yah. Yahu, God, he's God. So Eliyahu is unusual. It has a double theophoric. It has like Eli Yahu. So it's like my God, that's Yah. Yah is the one who's my God. It is a simple meaning, but it seems that as we go through time and see the more mystical side of Elijah, it's also like God appearing through Elijah, working through Elijah, but we'll see that more later. So here is something that Professor Matt quoted as like the epigraph in his Becoming Elijah from Moshe Cordovero, a famous Kabbalist. And would somebody like to read this? I can't see everybody, so maybe somebody just jump in and read this saying about the mystery of Elijah.
I can.
Okay, thank you, Elsa.
Yeah, his mystery is really the mystery of divinity spreading. Divine energy clothes itself in him, extending to the world. Elijah never appears in the world without the mystery of divinity revealing itself through him. The mystery of God on earth is the mystery of Elijah. The closest that divinity can possibly come to humanity is the mystery of Elijah.
Yeah. So Elijah, being that like he's got this God name, double God name, and he's always coming in disguise. They're kind of a hint that God appears in all kinds of disguises, that everything you encounter and every body you encounter might be Elijah in disguise. And actually beyond that, they're godly. All of us are God in disguise, so to speak, right? Reb Zalman said, we're really just God in drag. That's what he said. God is dressing up and wearing these garbs, and us too. And that's part of the deeper meaning of Elijah, as we'll be encountering. Also, this idea that it's the closest you can get to divinity in human form is interesting, because I had thought about Elisha being somewhat like Jesus, but a kind of reversal, because Jesus is a human being who is divine, whereas Elijah is like bringing down divinity to human beings. It's almost like, just a different way of humanity contacting divinity. And actually, if you do read Daniel Matt's book, he does talk about Elijah in early Christian thought and in Muslim thought, but I won't have time to get into really much of that today. Some other books about Elijah, I can supply this list to people, but I put these in reverse order, but I want to note that the third one was my own master's thesis at the University of Texas. It was about the legends of Elijah in rabbinic lore, like in the Talmud and the Midrash, and how they changed over the centuries, and the roles that Elijah played before he became the most famous figure in Jewish folklore. And the person listed above me, Chris Lindbeck, as a professor of Jewish studies who had been a visiting professor there in San Antonio when I was living there. It was really serendipity how I met her. She's not Jewish, but she loves rabbinic literature and has her degrees in Talmud and rabbinic literature and teaches them. And she did her doctoral dissertation about Elijah. So we had this in common. We both researched Elijah, and her book, The Prophet Elisha. Sorry, I double wrote her name again. Elijah and the Rabbis. I'm sorry, I'll fix that, but I can send that out. So I put some of the different works that I'm going to draw on. So first, though, we're going to look at Elijah in the Bible. Elijah, who is, I think I've got this. Okay. Elijah, who is like the 9th century before the Common Era in the northern kingdom of Israel. As you know, ancient Israel split after Solomon died into 2 kingdoms, the northern and the southern. The southern kingdom was pretty stable under the dynasty of the Davidic dynasty, King David and his family. But the northern kingdom, there was continuous infighting, fratricide, and all these different people, different kings killing each other off. And in that atmosphere, there was a king named Omri. His son is Ahav, who married the infamous Jezebel, who a Phoenician queen who brought in a lot of worship of the god Baal to the northern kingdom. Of course, Elijah very much opposed that. But so we'll see Elijah in the role of a zealot and a traditionalist, opposing any kind of religious syncretism being brought in to the people of Israel. But also Elijah, as a miracle worker, is already present in the Bible. Maybe, and I know that Jeff wrote, now this story isn't a Haftarah, but it's a story about Elisha in the Haftarah, Elijah's student. It's almost the same story, but from 1 Kings 17. But Jeffrey, would you like to read this? Can you see it on the screen? Would you like to read it? About Elijah's a miracle worker.
Elijah, on the run from the king, called to a poor widow gathering wood. Please bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink. As she went to fetch it, he called out to her, please bring along a piece of bread for me. As Adonai your God lives, she replied, I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am just gathering a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. We shall eat it and then we shall die. Don't be afraid, said Elijah to her. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a small cake from what you have there and bring it out to me. Then make it some for yourself and your son. For thus said Adonai, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that God sends rain upon the ground. She went and did as Elijah had spoken, and he and her household had food for a long time. The jar of flour did not give out, nor did the jug of oil fail, just as God had spoken through Elijah. That's not the end of the miracles. The boy becomes ill and lifeless, and Elijah prays and revives him.
So Jeffrey, does that remind you of a Haftarah with Elisha?
Absolutely. It reminds me of the Tazria.
Okay.
The miracle, the bread. That actually, it's interesting. The first, it says, give me the first bread. The term bikurim is used to feed his disciples or students at a time of famine. And the bread, this bit of bread works for, according to one count I read, 2,200 people, at least 100 people. And it's comparable to a Jesus miracle. What can I tell you?
Yeah. Or the other way around. Where did that come from? What came first? Since we're talking like 9th century before centuries before, we have these itinerant prophets who are miracle workers. Elijah, Eliyahu, then his student Elisha does very, very similar miracles. Right. And so that's the kind of the nice side of Elijah, but only one thing. He says they won't run out of oil till God sends rain. There was a terrible multi-year drought happening. And why did it happen? Because Elijah declared it would happen because of the idol worship that was going on in the court of Ahab. So he kind of caused the problem, but then he sent some miracles to help people. On the other hand, the other side of Elijah is that he was pretty much a zealot for God. And this is one of the most famous stories, which is also in a Haftarah. And we also, some of the lines, the climactic line when they say Adonai Hu Elohim, that became part of our Yom Kippur liturgy. We say it at the end of Yom Kippur. And it is even said as a part of the deathbed Shema, actually. It's very, so it's really entered into Jewish liturgy and profound moments in Jewish life. But then there's like one little paragraph at the end you'll see here, which we don't read, which is all of the revenge that Elijah then took. So it's this beautiful story how Elijah proved that, that God is the true God, but then he goes after the other people that don't believe like him. So would somebody like to read? This is a slightly longer story. I shortened it as much as I could. I didn't put everything in, but somebody want to read about how Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal, the prophets being worshipped, the God being worshipped by Jezebel and her court. And he's trying to rid the country of that. So anybody want to read?
I'd be happy to.
Okay. Is that Fern?
Yeah.
Okay, Fern, go for it.
Ahab sent orders to, I'm on my little phone screen.
No worries, we can hear you.
Okay, Ahab sent orders to all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you keep hopping between two opinions? If Adonai is God, then follow him, and if Baal, follow him." But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said to the people, "I am the only prophet of God left, while the prophets of Baal number 450. Let 2 young bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but let them not apply fire. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and will not apply fire. You will then invoke your God by name, and I will invoke God by name. And let us agree, the God who responds with fire, that one is God." And all the people answered, "Very good." The prophets of Baal failed to invoke divine fire to accept their offering. So it's Elijah's turn.
Oh, I guess that's like, yeah, that's what I had to edit just for length. But if you go and read the whole story in 1 Kings 18, really Elijah gets very sarcastic with them. They're going crazy. They're like slashing themselves, and he's just mocking them. Oh, maybe your God had to have a little bathroom break. Maybe your God, he's asleep. But now, okay, you guys are done. Now watch me, call on the real God. Okay, you can continue if you'd like.
Okay. Adonai, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, Adonai, answer me, that this people may know that you, Adonai, are God, for you have turned their hearts backward. Then fire from God descended and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When they saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, Adonai alone is God, Adonai alone is God. Then Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let not a single one of them get away. They seized them, and Elijah took them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there.
Yeah, because so that was the part we kind of cut that out of our Haftarah, and we don't, but that's where it went afterwards. You know, it was this triumphant moment. God is vindicated, and again, I did edit out because it's so long, but Elijah actually like has them put water all over everything to like show the miracle, to make really highlight the miracle of the fire coming down. And then they shout Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim, just like we do at the end of Yom Kippur. We're taking ourselves right there to Mount Carmel, which, has anybody been to Mount Carmel and outside of Haifa? Yeah, looks a lot like the Texas Hill Country. And in this really in the heights, and he's invoking God. So before we continue with a little bit more about Elijah in the Bible, I wanted to get into this topic of zealotry, or if you want to call it fanaticism, zealotry, kin'ah, like because the Bible does say God is a zealous God, Elkanah, and he is very zealous for God.
Anything is possible.
So, by the way, anybody who's not speaking, please do mute, because there's a little bit background sound coming in somehow. So, question, thoughts about zealotry? Like, we're in a time now where I think a lot of us are very concerned about zealotry in the Jewish people, but zealotry in general, you know, in the world. And the question is, how do we look at stories of zealotry? Like the Maccabees, for example, they were really zealots. They did not want to compromise on Hellenism. Do we say, well, that's what they had to do? If they hadn't been zealots back then, we wouldn't be here being nice, you know, liberal Jews today. Or is it like, no, why? Why do we have to wait this long to give up on zealotry? And any thoughts on zealotry? Nope. Feel free to write them in the chat too if you're just formulating your thought, you know, if you'd like. I mean, obviously it's very disturbing, right, that Elijah's killing all these other prophets. And I was reading the story of Jezebel. If you just look her up, you might say, well, she apparently, according to the story, she was pretty ruthless. On the other hand, she was also very dignified. How much of the ruthlessness was played up because she was the bad girl, you know? She became synonymous with all the wicked woman. and King David did kind of similar ruthless things, but he's our hero, right? So the question is, how do we view these figures from the past? I mean, we just went through this with Purim, all the story of the revenge of Purim. We try to excuse it, retell it, say it's kind of legendary. It is legendary, but how do we deal with the zealots of our past?
We have a lot of it. I mean,
yeah, right?
The Korach story, where what,
yeah.
3,000 followers, I think,
yeah,
children were swallowed up by the earth.
Yeah.
I think Pincus, who I think it was
Yeah.
Pincus, who took the spear and
yeah, yeah.
right, and then we
look it up. And Elisha is identified, and if you want to get into more, we don't have time for all of it, but he is identified with Pinchas in different ways because he's a zealot. Pinchas was a big zealot at the time of Moses.
We've got some others too. We've got Amalek, we've got Masada.
Yes, and I think
there's a lot of the Maccabee. I mean, Kachba. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
there's sort of,
Stan, we
it's a very
can't see your
dangerous-
whole face, by the way. I don't know if you can adjust your camera because this is recording with you, and I can't see your eyes, but if you want.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. But anyway, yeah, so I think a lot of times looking at those stories from the past, we could look back and say, but that's in our distant, distant past. But today we're still dealing with people that are different kinds of zealots in the world, right? Of different religions, and it's causing conflicts today. Just something to think about. But we'll see that Elijah will be transformed. The zealot will be transformed into, I don't know, warm and fuzzy, but a very caring, loving person. So we'll take it a little further with Elijah. Okay, so still in the Bible. This is one of my favorite stories. And again, I really had to edit quite a bit of it. But when Elijah is fleeing from Ahav and Jezebel, because he's on the move, he had to keep running away. He goes 40 days and 40 nights in Horeb, which is of Mount Sinai, basically. So he's also identified in many ways with Moses in tradition, the 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain. And this is the story, of course, of the whirlwind and the still small voice. So would somebody like to read this with a little drama for us? Anybody? Anybody?
It's Carol.
Okay, Carol, go for it.
Elijah walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. There he went into a cave, and there he spent the night. Then the word of God came to him. "Why are you here, Elijah?" He replied, "I am moved by zeal for Adonai, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life." "Come out," he called, "and stand on the mountain before God." And lo, God passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by God's power. But God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a voice of subtle stillness. The still small voice.
Right, exactly. And it's in Hebrew called Mama Daka. It's like a voice that's silent and thin. That was Reb Zalman's translation, but King James was the still small voice. And then you can read the next paragraph too.
When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle around his face and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then a voice addressed him. "Why are you here, Elijah?" He answered, "I am moved by zeal for Adonai, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and have put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life."
Okay, woo! So personally, I find this is one of my favorite stories because I like that, the still small voice, inside. With all that noise that was all around him. He was the prophet of fire and thunder, right? And yet he's being told to listen to the still small voice, and he kind of doesn't get it, right? He's kind of like, "No, I'm the only one. Everyone else has forsaken you." First of all, that doesn't seem to be quite correct because there are other people that are following God, but he sees himself as like the last holdout. So think about that, comparing that to Moses. What did Moses do in a similar situation where God is mad, people are worshiping idols? What does Moses do? What would Moses do? Well, he did break the tablets, but then God is like, "Oh, I'll start all over with you, Moses, and get rid of all these idolaters." And Moses is like, "No, no, 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 no." Moses speaks up for the people. He pleads and intercedes for them. And that's what Elijah, as the prophet, does not seem to do a good job of doing, according to the rabbis too later on, that he's not interceding enough for the people. Though, he's not standing in the breach in that sense, as they say. for the people to God, but he's instead saying they've forsaken your covenant. I'm the only one. And actually what happens right after that is that God basically says, well, I want you to go anoint a new king and then appoint a successor, basically, as I think Daniel Mann says this, like, you're fired. Like, he's the first prophet to get fired, but his career's not over. Don't worry. God's not done with him yet. So any thoughts about the Still Small Voice episode, and does it mean something to you? Have you ever thought about it? Anybody want to share? Carol, do you want to share any thoughts about it?
That means a lot to me because I'm a meditator, and in meditation, I am aware many times of the still small voice, particularly when I'm dealing with a question and in the quiet. So yes.
Very inner. Thank you. And this is also, of course, in a Haftarah. And I'm sorry that I didn't have the time to go look where these are all from Haftarah, but Jeffrey can find them for you now. He'll know them, or you'll come across them during the year. You can look them up. Yes, I love it. And in the Haftarah, it has this really dramatic trope for those dramatic effects of the wind and the earthquake. And that's like the cold, the still small voice. Okay. Well, eventually what happens? Elijah does appoint the successor, Elisha, his successor. And, but wait, first, since Elijah said that everyone had forsaken the covenant and he was the only one, he has to be at every Brit Milah to see how the Jews are upholding the covenant. You know that at a Brit Milah, there's Kiseh Shel Eliyahu, there's a picture of one, a special chair for Elijah. So he's both an honored guest at this, it's always a liminal time, you know, a child entering the world, and Elijah's there at liminal spaces, at entrances and doorways, but also kind of to say, hey, Elijah, we are keeping the covenant. You didn't have faith in us. Look at us. Here we are. Have the faith in us. Now that chair in an Ashkenazic rite, the baby is briefly put there. In a Sephardic tradition, as I recall it, actually the sandak sits on it and holds the baby for the Brit Milah. All right. So anyway, eventually Elisha, after he appoints his successor, Elisha, he gets taken away. They're walking along, speaking of some great mysteries of the universe. And Elisha gives him, well, his cloak, he gets Elijah's cloak. I'm trying to think if the cloak falls down, he picks it up. He can use it to split the water, like splitting the sea. He splits the Jordan River. And he can then assume the mantle of leadership. But Elijah is taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, or as my son used to call it when he was little, a UFO. Maybe it was a UFO. And that's when the real transportation transportation and transformation begins, because he doesn't die like in the normal way. He's goes to heaven, and he can come back many times. And then in Malachi, again, another Haftarah, this is the one actually that you will say for Shabbat HaGadol, this Shabbat, maybe we'll, even though we're doing a Friday night, we can sing the song that that comes from Malachi. You read it for Shabbat HaGadol before Passover. So it says, behold, Hinei ani sholech lechem et Eliyahu Navi. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful, or the great and awesome day of Adonai. And from there, again, we get this idea that Elijah will be back, and Elijah will herald the coming of the Messianic age and the Messiah. So now we're going to the new Elijah, the whole new chapter of Elijah, a totally different kind of Elijah in rabbinic literature and lore, including the Midrash, the Talmud, the Mishnah, etc. And here's some of his main roles. Again, since we're just having like an hour to 15-minute class, we don't have time to read my entire thesis, but I wrote a lot about this. If anyone is interested, there's one copy. It's a very rare edition. And one copy on a shelf somewhere at the University of Texas, because this was even pre-digital, you know, it's not even digital. Maybe it's in the library there somewhere. All right. So anyway, what did Elijah, especially in the early rabbinic works, I found that he decides halachic puzzles we just can't solve. And you might know that if you study a little Talmud, there are certain times where they say teku. Anybody familiar with that? If you study Talmud, it's like, it's supposed to be, I'm not sure if they invented this later, but it's supposed to kind of stand for Tishbi Yiteretz Kushiot Bayot. Elijah will come and solve the problem. If you get to argue, and you can't settle it, you say, Teku, it's like a tie. We don't know the answer, but Elijah will come someday. Suddenly Elijah has become, like so many figures, the great rabbi, and he will come and settle all the things we don't know. Number 2, he will announce the Messiah, just as Malachi, the prophet, said, the big redemption. He will be telling us when the Messiah is on the way. And then, though, a different role emerges for Elisha, a role that becomes more predominant over time. As more time passed and the Messiah didn't come yet, there were more stories of Elijah just helping people in this world as it is, in disguise, helping people out with little redemptions in our everyday life. And that's the role that began to predominate. At least that's what I saw in my little research back when I was doing my master's degree. And there are hundreds of stories and references about such roles in the diaspora. Even today, people tell stories of Elijah. There's a book, one of the books I mentioned, Meeting Elijah, True Tales of Eliyahu Navi by Eliezer Shore. People tell stories of mysterious experiences that they had with some stranger who kind of fixed everything, and they didn't know who they were, and maybe it was Elijah. Now, Elsa, do you have your hand up? Did you want to add something there? Elsa, are you just, no, okay. I thought maybe you want to share something. So have you ever heard stories like that about, or have you experienced something like that? Like some mysterious stranger kind of helped out in a pinch, and maybe it was Elijah. Or have you even heard stories like that? Well, now you're going to be more alert to it. The idea that maybe anybody, it could be a beggar, it could be a nobleman or noblewoman, but anybody could be Elijah. So we have to treat people, respectfully, because they could be Elijah, or we could be Elijah. That's the thing.
Well, we have a lot of stories out of the Holocaust of people, non-Jewish people, righteous Gentiles who were amazingly
interesting. You could say, I hadn't heard them described as Elijah, but definitely I think it's in that mode. Yeah. Carol, did you have one?
Yeah, I wanted to just say that it makes me think of the Lamed Vavniks. That any one of us could be a Lamed Vavnik.
Similar, I think so, similar. And Fern, you have your hand up. Is that because you have something to share?
I was just thinking that it's really recommended that when we do mitzvah or philanthropic efforts, that we do it anonymously. Yeah. And maybe that's so it could be attributed to Elijah.
Yes, I think so. And that's a lot of the times the stories kind of go like that. And that's when I'd say to the kids, be in Elijah's club, like you secretly do things people don't ever know who even did it, right? God remains anonymous, right? I'm trying to think of a story like that. Well, I just remember kind of a story like this that I was reading another book, like it was in Jerusalem back a few decades back. Things were tough. And a woman was kind of crying on a park bench about how, she had all these problems and didn't have money, and she wished Elijah would be there to help her. And like the woman sitting next to her is kind of like, decided to be her Elijah, that's the kind of story like that. But in the Talmud and the Midrash, there are so many great stories, which we don't even have time for all of them, but I thought we could read a few of them and get a little of the flavor of these wonderful Elijah, what's called Agadot, the lore of Elijah. So when will the Messiah come? Now, this is a story that it's in the Reconstructionist prayer book for the end of Yom Kippur, and I like to read it. Would anybody like to read this from the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 98?
Sure, I can read it.
Okay, thanks, Elsa.
Yeah. So Rabbi
Yehoshua
ben Levi said to Elijah, "When will the Messiah come?" Elijah said to him, "Go ask him." Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi.
You can just call him Joshua. Sorry.
Joshua. Okay.
Yeah. Yehoshua is the Hebrew. Yeah.
Okay. So Rabbi Joshua asked, "And where is he sitting?" Elijah said to him, "At the entrance of the city of Rome." Rabbi Joshua asked him, "And what is his identifying sign by means of which I can recognize him?" Elijah answered, "He sits among the poor who suffer from illnesses, and all of them untie their bandages and tie them all at once. But the Messiah unties one bandage and ties one at a time." He says, "Perhaps I will be needed to serve to bring about the redemption. Therefore, I will never tie more than one bandage, so that I will not be delayed."
And let's just stop right there. This is a perfect reading for you, Elsa, I think, because of your role as a physician dealing with people, especially that we're dealing with illnesses that they found stigmatizing. You know, sometimes if I say we talked about it a little bit, that this, I think in the Hebrew or the Aramaic was saying like the people that were like the lepers, like, and they had these bandages and they're tying, you know, kind of dressing them. And, but the Messiah, he just does one at a time because he's ready to roll anytime we need him. But here he is. The Messiah is disguised as a beggar. And that means any beggar out there could be the Messiah, or it could be, you know, Elijah Messiah. They get a little bit blended together. Of course, here Elijah's just telling Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, but we could anyway continue. So he, what happened next? Yeah.
Okay, so Rabbi Joshua went to the Messiah. He said to the Messiah, "Greetings to you, my rabbi and my teacher." The Messiah said to him, "Greetings to you, Bar Levi." Rabbi Joshua said to him, "When will the master come?" The Messiah said to him, "Today." Sometime later, Rabbi Joshua came to Elijah. Elijah said to him, "What did the Messiah say to you?" He said to Elijah that the Messiah said, "Greetings to you, Bar Levi." Elijah said to him, "He therefore guaranteed that you and your father will enter the world to come, as he greeted you with shalom." Rabbi Joshua said to Elijah, "The Messiah lied to me, as he said to me, 'I am coming today,' and he did not come." Elijah said to him that this is what he said to you. He said that he will come today if you will listen to his voice.
So that is a great, I mean, very powerful story. Just want to like let it sink in for a moment. All the lessons there. This idea of we're looking for the Messiah with the great and powerful. We should be looking among, you know, the poorest of the poor, the sufferers. And yes, the Messiah will come today, but only if we're worthy. Clearly, we've not been worthy. But the potential is always there, and Elijah's kind of there to lead us towards that. So that's one really powerful story. Some of the stories are more amusing. There's all different ones. This is one, I'll read this one because this is one that, to me, got me started on the whole Elijah thing. Rabbi Yosef, Elijah at the door of a ruin. This is near the beginning of the Talmud Tractate, Brachot 3a. He said, "I was walking along the road when I entered the ruins of an old abandoned building among the ruins of Jerusalem in order to pray." So this is after the destruction of the temple. "I noticed Elijah, of blessed memory, came and guarded the entrance for me and waited at the entrance till I finished my prayer. When I finished praying and exited the ruin, Elijah said to me, 'Greetings to you, my rabbi.' And I answered him, 'Greetings to you, my rabbi, my teacher.'" You see, everyone's very polite and shows a lot of honor and respect. Elijah said, "My son, why did you enter this ruin?" And I said, "In order to pray." Elijah said to me, "You should have prayed on the road." And there's a little exchange I edited here. "You should have recited an abbreviated prayer for your own safety. You shouldn't be wandering into ruins. They could fall on your head." Again, simple story, but I think it has so many lessons about Elijah and Jewish life. First of all, where's Elijah guarding? Anybody's just say it. Where is he? at the door, right? He's at the entrance. And that's going to be associated with Passover. And there's other stories like that. I didn't bring the story about Bar Yochai, but he's at the entrance to the cave. He's usually at the door. He's a liminal figure when you're making a transition, right? And also in the Seder, we're going to open the door with Elijah. Also, Jewish life was in ruins after the Roman conquest, the destruction of the temple. And he's like saying, don't linger in the ruins of the past. Get on the road, get going, even if you have to shorten your prayer. Life must go on. I think that's part of it, right? At any rate, and the other thing is the idea that rabbis, we saw in the previous story and this one, that various rabbis would encounter Elijah. That's called Gilui, the revelation Eliyahu of Elijah. Some of these rabbis were just like buddies with Elijah, especially Joshua ben Levi, but other ones, and with the mystics, they would work hard to see Elijah, but it seems like with the rabbis, Elijah would just kind of show up for them. This is okay. I love this story. Let me see what the time frame. I think we've got time for this. I love to tell this story. It's a great campfire story. So maybe I'll tell you this one and then I'll get readers again. So there's a famous person in rabbinic lore called Nachum Ish Gamzu, Nachum of Gamzu, because he always said, Gamzu Latova. This too is for the best. And he was sent by the Jewish community when they needed to pay a tribute to the Roman ruler. They thought, this guy, Gamzu, he's a saintly person. We'll send him. Things will go well. They sent him off with a chest of jewels and pearls, and he went. And on the way, he spent the night at an inn. And during the night, the other people at the inn, or maybe the innkeeper, somebody robbed all the jewels, and they just filled his chest with dirt, so it would be heavy. But all the jewels were gone. And when Nachum finally saw what happened, he said, oh, Gamzu Latova, this is for the good. But when he arrived there and presented it to the emperor, it was filled with dirt, and the king was ready to execute him. But then Nachum, of course, is still going, Gamzu Latova, this is for the good. Elijah the prophet came and appeared before the ruler as one of his ministers. So now Elijah is in disguise, not with the poor beggars or anything, but Elijah is like one of the king's own ministers. And he says, oh, well, maybe this is the special earth. Have you heard of the earth of Abraham? When he threw it, it would turn into arrows, and he could use it to fight with. While there was one province the Romans were unable to conquer, they took some of the earth, they tested it, they threw it, and it worked. It was a great secret weapon. They conquered the enemy. The rulers saw the earth had miraculous powers, and they richly rewarded Nachum of Gamzu, who usually, as usual, was right. It was for the best. And so happy end to that story. When I share that today with kids, I like to say that we often think of the earth as just dirt, but the earth is the greatest treasure of all. And this is a wonderful story for, about the environment, I think, and valuing the earth. If you want to make this story a little revenge, you can say that I've heard the story told that the innkeepers or the people that had switched the jewels for the dirt say, oh, the emperor wants dirt, we'll bring him a box of dirt, but it doesn't work for them. Okay, so that's another of the many, many legends. I got a couple more for you. This is Elisha in disguise as far as reframing. Here, Elisha shows up like as just a regular person, and he doesn't give people a prize, but he does give them a reframe to their situation. And here it's with the great, great Rabbi Akiva, like one of the all-time great rabbis in the around the year 100. He marries the beautiful Rachel, the daughter of Bar Kalba Savua, who objects to the wedding. So anybody want to read this little story for us? Anybody hasn't read and want to read? Anybody? Fern, would you read it?
Happy to if no one else wants to.
Okay.
Well, I have to get the print big on my screen.
Okay.
Rabbi Akiva,
yes.
Rabbi Akiva became betrothed to the daughter of the wealthy Bar Kalba Savia. When Bar Kalba, say it again?
Kalba Savu, it doesn't matter. They're just
Okay.
the rich dude. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. When Bar Kalba Savua heard about the betrothal, he took a vow prohibiting her from eating all of his property. Despite this, she went ahead and married Rabbi Akiva. In the winter, they would sleep in a storehouse of straw, and Rabbi Akiva would gather strands of straw from her hair. He said to her, "If I had the means, I would place on your head a Jerusalem of gold, a type of crown." Elijah the prophet came and appeared to them as a regular person and started calling and knocking on the door. He said to them, "Give me a bit of straw, as my wife gave birth, and I do not have anything on which to lay her." Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, "See this man who does not even have straw. We should be happy with our lot, as we at least have straw to sleep on."
Okay, and this is also from the Talmud. Now, I wanted to ask you there, again, now think about Elijah's in your life. It might be hard to think of this on the spur of the moment, but has anybody ever come along and just reframed something for you when you were feeling, I just don't know, I can cope, but then you saw somebody else, you know, in a different, maybe worse situation, you felt somehow it helped you. Maybe it was Elijah. Anybody, can you think of any story like that? You might start, if you can't think of it right now, just take it with you. It's like open your eyes to Elijah. Maybe somebody will come along and do something wonderful for you, or you for someone else. Or maybe someone will just come and kind of reframe the way you're seeing things, like Elijah in this particular story. Okay, I think I got one more. I know I had so many, it was so hard to pick. And of course, we could not, yeah, this is the last Talmud one. This is a great one. It's really weird because Elijah in this one is dressed as a prostitute. Elijah's most unusual disguise. I'll read it for you. So, Rabbi Meir, great, very, very famous rabbi. He was on a mission to Rome to save his sister-in-law from forced prostitution herself. So things were very bad then. The Romans were terrible, especially to these sages. And he's going to try to rescue his sister-in-law. The authorities engraved his image at the entrance of Rome to be seen by everyone, like kind of like a wanted poster. And they said, anyone who sees him, turn him in. Well, one day the Romans saw Rabbi Meir and they ran after him, and he ran away from them, and he entered a brothel to hide. Some say he had escaped, and then there's different stories. Oh, well, he pretended to eat non-kosher food. Then they knew it wasn't him. But then some say he escaped detection because Elijah came, appeared to them as a prostitute, and embraced Rabbi Meir. And the Romans who were chasing him said, "Heaven forbid, if this were Rabbi Meir, he would not act in this way." So that's a really wild story, huh? And Daniel Matt does quote that one too, but just shows you the range of things that Elijah could be. He could be poor, he could be a regular dude, right? He could be a rich and powerful person, or he could be a woman. He could be even a woman of ill repute, but he turns, in other words, anybody could be Elijah. Anybody could be that divinity, including such a woman, right? We don't know people. In fact, there's another story I didn't put here where the rabbi asks him, "Elijah, who's destined for the world to come?" And he's like, "Well, those clowns over there." Why? Because they make people laugh. So they're going to go to, the world to come, or they're going to merit whatever the world to come means. Or as Daniel Matt would call it, the world that is always coming. That is the world of the better world that's coming, or maybe the future world that's coming. All right, so that's just a selection of numerous stories from the Talmud about Elijah. And then we'll take it further. I want to try to finish the next, by 8:15. I'm aware of the time, but and leave time for us to talk more at the end. But Elijah continues in folklore throughout the centuries, throughout all the countries. And you can see this little book in Yiddish for our Yiddish lovers, illustrated by no less than Mark Chagall. And this is the source of this is Library of Congress. You can look it up. It is by Y.L. Peretz, who was a great figure of the Jewish Enlightenment, who wrote this beautiful story, which is also available in English in various versions. And I can, at the end, put these books in the chat if anyone wants to grab them and look at some of them. But the idea is this story of this poor Jewish couple who do not have anything really for Passover, and a magician who's come to town, mysterious man, works his magic, and he makes this beautiful Passover meal for them just by magic, and they don't know if they should eat it. Could it be like bad magic or, black magic? So they go to the Rebbe, who says, well, if you can really eat it, and it must be real, it's good. And they go back and then they realize it was Elijah, right? So that's one of the stories of Elijah. And, when I told the kids as a Yemenite, that was a story I learned as a Yemenite story, where there's a couple who they're wonderful people, but they're longing for a child, typical story. And Elisha, an old man, they invite him to the Seder, and he gives them the blessing. He says, next year, may your Seder table be a big mess. And they're so offended and hurt, but they forget about it. And the next year they have a baby, everything's a mess. And he comes back and they're like, oh, wait, it was really a blessing. Maybe where'd he go? Where'd he go? It's Elijah, right? So stories like that. There's so many wonderful Elijah stories. All right. So I think we're getting towards the end here. A lot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got like 3 slides. Elijah's cup. Oh, I just had to give a trip down memory lane to another famous Danan Seder, because like this year I have absolutely no guests and I don't know what I'm doing. But last year, one of my kids, you could see in the corner there that a couple of people were on Zoom, and that included my daughter, who was about to have a baby. And the rest of us were in Philly having this Seder, wearing funny hats and stuff like that. So Elijah's cup, how do we have Elijah at the Seder at all? If we look in the earliest Haggadot from the time of the Geonim, like after the end of the Talmud, like 800, something like that, there was not a mention of Elijah, but we did open the doors symbolically, and it began to develop over time. It said that there was a great sage who would open the door and say, let all who are hungry come and eat, right? So we got this idea that it's an open door experience. And then, let me stop the screen share for a minute. We also, maybe during the Middle Ages, as Jews were afraid of the blood libels, of people saying that around Passover, that was a very dangerous time for Jews. During Easter, there was a passion plays and things that made people stirred up their hatred of Jews. Unfortunately, during the Inquisition, there could be informants outside. So they might have been opening the door to just be sure they were safe, right? And then they would say this, pour out your wrath, this, prayer to kind of, for God to protect them from the people that were scaring them. So that might have influenced this idea of opening the door. But Elijah himself there's other reasons given for Elijah being at our Seder, besides being this liminal figure that's at the open door. So I'm going to, again, share this and give you some of the ones that I discovered when I was doing my master's thesis. All the things that Elijah did that I said in rabbinic literature that Elijah is known for are the halachic, solving halachic puzzles, announcing the Messiah, and being a figure of human kindness. So that, as Daniel Matt says, that loner prophet, that lone zealot becomes someone who comes to every family feast and Brit Milah and Havdalah when we're getting ready for the week to start. So those all come together with Elijah at the Seder. First of all, how many cups of wine are you supposed to have? So one midrash is that if you look at Exodus 6, there's 4 languages, lishonot the Geulah. There's 4 expressions of redemption. Hotzeti, tzati, galti, lakachti. God will take us out. God will rescue us. God will redeem us, and God will take us. There's 4 there, so there's 4 cups of wine. That's one explanation for why there's 4 cups. And a couple down, a little bit further down in the text, it says, and God will take us as a people. So maybe there should be 5 cups of wine. 4, 5, 4, 5. Not sure. We'll have one for Elisha, and he'll decide. He'll tell us. He'll come eventually and tell us how many to have. I think as Daniel Matt explains it another way, it's like people began to include Elisha, and then it was kind of like, well, he should have a glass of wine, right? Okay. Then secondly, of course, is the messianic aspect of Elijah. You know, a lot of people at the Seder, some Seders, people after dinner kind of fade out. Taking a poll here. How many people here go on after dinner at their Seder? You can, yeah. How many people? Good. How many people, like, everybody's out of there, they ate and they ran away? You don't have to tell. But really, there should be something after dinner. And that is because the story of Passover is not just about God brought us out of Egypt a long time ago and we were rescued and redeemed, but after dinner with a fourth cup, it's like, and God will do it again for the whole world, with Elijah telling us the Messiah is coming. And that's really the message of the Seder, not just he did it once, but he'll do it twice. A question, what should you do? Oh, should you drink? Can you drink Elijah? I'm not sure. Maybe we better ask Elisha that. Actually, I was reading, I think this was in, now I'm trying to remember where I read it. I think it might have been in Dan Matt's book, that the whole idea with the cup also started with like an Ashkenazic custom that people would put some of their leftover wine in the cup, and then somebody did drink it. One of the Rebbe's drank it. So I guess there's nothing wrong with drinking it, right?
Yeah, that was.
Yes. Anybody else? Thoughts? Okay, I thought I heard somebody talking, but
No, I said that was in the book.
Okay, it was in the book. He said people did drink, somebody did drink it. Okay. So actually at our Seder, what we do is we have this big cup for Elijah and ask people to pass it around, and everybody put a drop of their own wine in while saying something they're grateful for and saying a prayer for the future, you know, of what we want for the world in the year to come. And I hope to do something like that at our congregational Seder, not with all the people there maybe, but with a few people. And that's a beautiful way to kind of get everybody involved at the Seder. All right, so Elijah, I won't go into, let's see, looking at the time here, I know we can't go into too much detail. Oh, we have a little time. But there was an idea of, again, Gilui Eliyahu is the idea that the rabbis would have a visitation from Elijah. And when it came to the Kabbalah and mysticism, of which Dan Matt, of course, is a great expert, these different Kabbalists would do all kinds of things to induce a vision of Elijah who they felt would share with them the mysteries, you know, of the universe, right? But then when you get to Hasidic teaching, so we have Kabbalah, classic Kabbalah, like what goes back really thousands, couple thousand years, but really like 1,000 years ago, the classic Kabbalah, I don't know. It's hard to date over the centuries, but with Hasidic teachings the past like 300 years, the idea, the expression became Bechinat Eliyahu, like the aspect of Elijah, that in each of us, we can have a little bit of Elijah in us. He says, a mystical insight, a creative urge, an eagerness to uplift others. By cultivating this aspect or spark, says the Professor Matt, we can, in a sense, become Elijah. We can find our inner Elijah. And this is the last slide I had, is finding Elijah within. And he tells a wonderful Hasidic story, of which there are different variations. But would somebody like to read this last story of finding our own Elijah within? Anybody?
Sure, I can.
Okay, Elsa, please do.
Sure. Hasidic story conveys this nicely. A pious Jew once asked his rabbi why Elijah never appeared on the night of the Seder, even though the door was open for him and his goblet of wine was waiting on the table. The rabbi told him, there is a very poor family in your neighborhood. Go visit them and propose that next year you and your family will celebrate Passover with them in their house, and that you will provide everything they need for the whole holiday. Then on the night of the Seder, Elijah will certainly come. The man did as he was told, but after the following Passover, he returned to the rabbi, complaining that once again Elijah had failed to appear. The rabbi responded, Elijah came, but you couldn't see him. Holding a mirror to the man's face, he continued, look, this was Elijah's face that night.
Yeah. So you get it. Don't have to explain that.
Yeah.
But I've heard other stories like that where a person is told to go to a house and they're going to help the people, and then he'll see Elijah, and he's like, I didn't see Elijah. But the rabbi says, go back. And when he goes back, all the children of the house come out and say, Mommy, it's Elijah. He's here to help us again. So then he realizes, oh, wait, I was Elijah. So from the mystic's point of view, it's like, I'm looking for God, but the divinity's within me. I'm looking for the Messiah, but we're all supposed to be like helping bring the Messianic era. So I'm looking for Elijah, someone to do good in the world, but maybe I should be looking in the mirror. Okay, Susan.
So, in our house, as in probably many houses, we keep adding things to the Seder plate.
Yes,
Orange,
I know what you mean.
And it goes on and on.
Yes, indeed.
And I've heard that one of the other additions on your Seder plate could be a mirror, so that when you
wow,
yeah,
that's interesting. Okay, well, I had not heard that one. Interesting. Okay, I like it. I've heard of so many things you can put on your Seder plate, right? But not a mirror. Okay, so I'm putting a couple of, I don't know, has anybody else heard stories like that or have interesting things you put on your Seder plate that you want to tell us about?
Oh,
yeah.
So some of you might have heard this story, but there was someone told me this story, that there was a Holocaust survivor who had come to a Seder and told the story about while they were, during the Holocaust, they didn't have anything for a Seder. And so over the course of a few weeks, they had saved a potato. And then they had this coveted potato that they used, and that was their Seder feast. And so every year after that, the family would put a potato on the Seder plate in remembrance of what people had suffered through the Holocaust.
Wow. Well, I think that's meaningful, these different things that people put. I mean, we've had the orange, the tomato, the olive. I think there's a pineapple. I don't know. You can put all these different things. I've had Rabbi Arthur Waska says you could have a second plate, a freedom plate, where you put something that represents freedom to you, and you can have a wonderful discussion around that. So it's putting yourself there, finding your inner Elijah. I like that. Thank you, Susan. And thanks to everybody who read, thank you so much. I put a couple of things in the chat. One is I did say I would teach about Serach bat Asher, the feminine version of Elijah, but I just realized I would not have time, but I put in an article there and maybe we could learn about her later. She's a biblical figure, a woman, the daughter of Asher, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And she was also considered like an immortal because she's mentioned many generations after she should have died. So she becomes a little like Elijah-like. And even Miriam does too. I mean, both of them are seen as predicting Moses, and there's a female version, but gotta leave something for next time. And then I also put in the different books that I mentioned in case you want to grab it, just copy them, grab them, and look at anything else. There's, besides the True Tales of Elijah, Chris Limbeck's book, my master's thesis, obviously I'm a little tongue-in-cheek, but I do have it. Penina Schramm's Wonderful Tales, Folklore of Elijah. Aaron Weiner, this is the depth psychological kind of a Jungian view of Elijah. It's a really interesting book. And then The Magician from I.L. Peretz. The version I like best is the one of Uri Shalevich. I think I have it at the synagogue, but you could probably get it in the library. It's a great book for kids. So I've been through all my slides and things, but to review, we've seen Elijah transform from a zealous prophet who thought he was the only one to somebody who then becomes an immortal, who's transformed to become sort of part of everybody. And anybody could be Elijah. And he's not so zealous. He's somebody that can see, well, if we see more about him, they can see different points of view. And we can, in our search for communion with God and for revelation, we could actually find that it's in the kindness to others that we performed, that we could find the greatest revelation of God. Anybody have any thoughts, like anything new that you learned tonight or interesting to you that you want to reflect on or think you might bring to your Seder this year? Please.
I've got
before we finish, yeah.
Some of you may know this who have children of a certain age, but Midrash is being created all the time. There's a book called The Matzah Ball that I don't know how many of you read it, but it's about a young boy from Baltimore who goes to a baseball game and has to take a Passover meal with him because it's during Passover, and he feels deprived and all because he's eating matzah. He sits next to an old man. You're laughing because all of us who have kids know about this one. And it turns out he catches a fly ball that the old man next to him has said that, something like this is going to happen. And then he leaves. And was he Elijah the prophet? Well, certainly, but it's... well,
that's delightful. I'd love to get that especially for my grandson who loves baseball. So what's
if you've got a baseball-loving grandson.
What's the book called?
It's called The Matzah Ball, and it's by unfortunately, I forget her name. She is a woman rabbi from Baltimore.
Okay.
But
we'll look it up because I know I have another book called The Matzah Ball, but it was a Jewish romance.
That's a different one.
Totally different.
It's called The Matzah Ball, but
it was a ball like where you dance.
No, that's another one. But this is because I've never.
Any others? Yeah, thank you.
This is an Elijah the prophet story for our times, and it's really. I mean, if we sit with a while and think about it deeply, this idea of God not being just up there, but God, being here, being in so many guises, being discoverable and being finding within ourselves. It's really wonderful. Anybody else have anything else? Well, just want to maybe a little chorus of Eliyahu Hanavi and we'll send us out. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Wishing everybody a very happy Pesach, Chag Sameach. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you. I'll stop the recording, but thank you all for being here. And our next program will be for Shavuot. Well, actually, we're planning for the eve of Shavuot for our study time, and it'll be about the mountains in Judaism. Okay. Oh, fabulous.
Thank you very much.